People appear to be divided on whether it's possible to be too rich. The Australia Talks national survey asked if it's ethical to be a billionaire. Here's Casey Briggs with a look at the views of the mega wealthy.
Money makes the world go round, but the vast majority of us think the cash isn't being shared fairly right now. 79% of us say the gap between rich and poor Australians is too big. Young, old, rich, poor, most of us agree no matter how you look at it. But is it possible for a single person to have too much wealth? There are now 104 billionaires in this country. That's according to the Australian Financial Review's annual Rich List. Top of the list, Gina Rinehart, Andrew Forrest, Anthony Pratt. We asked Australians, regardless of how hard they may have worked for it, should any individual have a net worth of $1 billion? It was one of the questions that most divided us as a nation, but that statement still garnered significant support. 41% agree no one should be a billionaire. 46% disagree. And the further you are from being a billionaire, the more likely you are to think it's not okay to be one. Among those with income less than $1,500 a week, more agree than disagree. But that's not the case for most higher income Australians. And of course, there's a political dimension to this too. The group among the most likely to agree no one should be a billionaire, those are Greens voters. Least likely to agree, people who vote Liberal or National.
And for more on this, Professor Carl Rhodes is a Professor of Organisational Studies at UTS. I spoke to him earlier. There seems to be general agreement amongst Australians that the wealth gap is too great. When it comes to billionaires, though, the picture's not so clear. So what do you make of that?
I mean, it's hard to tell because it really is quite significant. Australia has many billionaires. The wealth of billionaires is increasing. And I'm not sure, perhaps people don't really understand what $1 billion is. But if you think about the average Australian income, $1 billion is 1,250 times the amount an average Australian will earn in a year. It is significant excessive wealth. And the most wealthy people earning more than 30 billion, it really is extraordinarily excessive. Some would say this is obscene level of wealth, which is kind of the pointy end of inequality, if you like, the absolute pinnacle of what the differences can be between the ultra-wealthy and just normal people.
Does Australia's fair go culture go against being a billionaire?
Well, I mean, the fair go culture means everyone has a chance. That doesn't suggest that there's an equality of outcomes. But the fact that everyone has a chance, but the outcomes can be so massively different that, you know, if you look at COVID, for example, that you have billionaires who increased their wealth, on average the top 200 by 13%, where many other people had to withdraw their life savings in super in order to just get by.
How do they generally handle their wealth?
Very effectively, it would seem, because it seems to be increasing. I mean, as a billionaire, I mean, this is a significant amount of wealth. It's not just money, of course. It's wrapped up in all kinds of assets and stocks and property, as well as who knows, you know, gold and diamonds. I'm not quite sure. So it would be managed. It would be managed by somebody else, by and large, through a series of intermediaries and financial advisors who would manage that on their behalf. Again, using that expertise, which you and I don't have access to, in order to keep propelling that wealth more and more, and even broadening and escalating the divisions between the very rich and normal Australians.
And how does that wealth trickle down to employees or philanthropy, for example?
Yeah, I mean, trickle-down's interesting. We were kind of told in the 1980s that if we cut corporate tax and cut tax to the rich, then all these benefits would trickle down to regular people. I mean, that's proved to be a bald-faced lie. The only beneficiaries of the people who the wealth stayed which is the rich. So to some extent, there is an element of job creation, because the people who are billionaires are generally in business of some kind. So money will be generated in that way. But having said that, while the wealth of the billionaires is increasing, wages for normal Australians is relatively stagnant. That doesn't suggest to me a trickle down. It suggests that we have a trickle up.
Does the behaviour of billionaires go beyond the reach of governments and regulators? Are they made to behave ethically?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, the behaviour of billionaires, obviously they have very complex arrangements, very complex tax arrangements. Many of the corporations that are owned by billionaires are diverting tax away to minimise effective tax rates, so that the potential benefit to government, which is then distributed to the nation, is not present. So many people will engage in quite complex, particularly through business, forms of tax avoidance. Whether the government can do anything, I mean, it seems the government isn't really doing anything at the moment. I mean, I think what COVID has demonstrated to us is that when there is a political will, the government can intervene. The Australian government took on $311 billion of debt to fund COVID, came up with radical programs and intervened in the economy and in society in a way that we would not have thought possible. So when there's a political will, the government can act. When it comes to inequality and when it comes to billionaires, there is an absence of political will to do anything about it.
And you talked about this a little bit earlier, but how did COVID impact Australia's billionaires?
Very well. Their wealth increased by 13%. I think a total of 56 billion shared amongst the top 200 wealthiest people. In some cases, people refer to these as the pandemic profiteers who used, in retail, for example, the online shopping became significant, different uses of technology for people working at home, also just changes in prices for raw materials and so forth. But COVID was good news for billionaires everywhere. Almost all of them increased their wealth during this period.
Professor Carl Rhodes from the University of Technology, Sydney, thanks for coming in.
My pleasure, thank you.